if I really place my bets on somebody to define the new job descriptions of the future, whether it's, empathy architects or intuition engineers, I really think I would place my bets on them to reimagine the work that needs to be done with AI rather than, our generations, we are trying to take these tools, these fantastic tools, and try to fit them in these old deterministic problems of yesterday. And then we're getting surprised why things are not working. But I think they will try to look at these new tools in a different way, where hallucination will be seen as a feature and not as a bug, and definitely depend and create ecosystems around it.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Conversation Changers. I've been trying to think back to when we all first started hearing about artificial intelligence and things like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, the large language models known as LLMs that we read so much about. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago that any of this really meant anything. Yeah, it was a thing that was coming, always in the future, 1 or 2 years away. But it sounded more like the HAL 9000 from the Space Odyssey series on TV, or on Star Trek when Captain Kirk or Spock or Scotty just talked to the air and asked the computer to do something and it just magically happened. None of it felt real, even just a couple of years ago. But it does today. Listen to this, and if you have a teenager like I do, this will probably sound very familiar. 84% of U.S. high schoolers surveyed this year by the College Board said they use AI for their schoolwork. Half say they use it to brainstorm, edit, and revise their essays. A survey in the UK found that 92% of university students there use it to help write their essays. And it's not just students. Teachers as well are increasingly relying on AI to create lesson plans, homework assignments, and even to grade papers. So you have this weird situation where more and more students are using AI in writing their papers, and more teachers are using AI to grade those papers. We're living in really weird times. And of course, then there's the job market. Microsoft, Salesforce, Amazon, McKinsey, Accenture, KPMG are all just a few of the companies that have announced massive layoffs this year in response to AI. Either because they want to invest more in AI infrastructure or because the jobs that were once done by lower skilled employees can now be done by the machines. And spare a thought for young people graduating school everywhere around the world who are finding it a lot more difficult to break into a job market where the entry-level positions are increasingly being taken up by artificial intelligence. Again, these are strange times. But this is our new reality, and we all have to find a way forward in an era where humans are not the only things out there with advanced cognitive skills. So what does it mean to be human? Okay, I know this is a strange question, but it's important for us to think about this in this context of artificial intelligence and soon artificial general intelligence when the machines start thinking for themselves. I'm thrilled to be joined by the perfect person to help us explore this question. Jasvin Bhasin is a tech philosopher, engineer, and founder of Bridge the Next, a Munich-based think and do tank for digital futures. She is also a Salzburg Global Fellow, mentor for next generation leaders, and a sought-after speaker for topics such as AI, blockchain, and the future of work. Jasvin, welcome to Conversation Changers.
Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you to explore some of these weird yet very important questions. I want to start with this question that I talked about what does it actually mean to be human in the age of AI, where we are not the only entities that create complex ideas. What is this going to do to creativity, to original thought, to innovation?
I mean, it's a very heavy question, and it's good to dive right into it. When we look at the advent of the internet, and what we managed to do back then was create a space where we had zero marginal costs for distribution of information, which basically is a jargon term to say that the cost of sending one extra email doesn't mean anything to the user. And with generative AI, what we've managed to do is create this space where we have zero marginal costs for content creation, which means for the 19th time, when you ask ChatGPT to rewrite the speech that you're writing for your grandfather's 100th birthday, the output that gets spit out doesn't have the scarcity quotient that it had before. Before, creativity meant something, and we've managed to commoditize the entire creative expression in this age of generative AI, which might have not been that bad a thing. It's just that we live in an age where we have to deal with something known as the attention economy, where nobody has an attention span that's, more than 5 seconds. So now the question really is, what does this mean for our creative intelligence and the expression of it, and commoditizing it to this extent where it's not scarce anymore and it is just something that you get at the click of the button, will strip it of its well-deserved, value, which we previously attached to it. So it's a tough time, because when I think about it, there is something known as the Moravec's paradox. This Canadian-Austrian computer scientist who back in the day said that the ability of machines to do things that humans very commonly and very effortlessly do, like writing a poem or designing a beautiful artwork, is something the machines will always perhaps not be very good at. And what we're already seeing is that the gap is closing. And how?
Yeah. I mean, all of us have started to experience this attention deficit disorder. This is something that everybody is being confronted with because we're scrolling more on Instagram and TikTok, and we're scrolling through the web all the time, and we don't want to read long form. We can't concentrate as much anymore. I've noticed that at universities and in high schools, they're not reading physical books anymore. They're reading PDFs, which are easier to scan. And so as our brains change from our attention, I'm wondering on the creation side, what you've talked about in terms of the lack of scarcity for original thought. Are we going to get to a point where the quality of poetry and writing and history and analysis and ideas and innovation are all going to kind of come down to this lowest common denominator of ChatGPT? ChatGPT is good, it's just not great. It's kind of meh. Do you know what I mean? The writing. And where is this taking us?
I think I'm always a long-term optimist when it comes to these things. And I really feel that the infiltration of the creative space through generative AI is definitely a clear invitation in our times to explore more about what really it means to be human. And maybe it's really an era of retribution and relevance, and maybe newfound relevance for the social sciences, the forgotten sciences of literature, anthropology. When I grew up back in India, one of the major things that you always did was made sure that you do some sort of a mathematical degree. You get some sort of a financial mathematical education to make sure that you are in the workforce, able to create value and get paid for it, high sums of money. And we really have an opportunity to now redefine, I think, what constitutes as value in this new AI age. Because even if we look at the way we transitioned to a knowledge economy, and now to an attention economy, there have been so many inefficiencies. A typical knowledge worker, even at work, spends a majority of his time in Zoom calls, in emails, in a lot of work. Where is the space to think? And I guess when this sort of a sudden shakeup is happening, it's perhaps an opportunity for us to really relook. For example, what has the education system really done for the perpetuation of wisdom, for example? We've created these buckets of knowledge, these courses that exist over time. I mean, I've had the opportunity to look at education systems in India, in Hong Kong, in Switzerland, in Germany, and everywhere it's pretty much the same story. And, there's an example of Sweden, for example, where once the digital technologies in the 2000s were really proliferating, they made a conscious choice to increase the level of the use of digital technology in schools. And they backtracked all of that in the early 2020s because they realized that it was leading to a reduction in the capability of students. So perhaps I would, before we go ahead and start, rolling out ChatGPTs and Claudes in universities and schools, perhaps we take a step back and try and redefine and reevaluate what is it that the education systems of the future require. And perhaps they don't necessarily need to be these hotbeds or ecosystems of digital brilliance, but instead of this raw coming together of human idiosyncrasies of, people coming together in these classrooms for engagement, where it's not really a question of, have I studied something? Can I reproduce it and rote learn and reproduce it on paper? But maybe a question of, I have all this in my pocket, the entire knowledge of the world, but how do I, together with others, connect the dots and create outputs that have been non-existent for the longest time? And perhaps also not just limited to the elite and the ones who study, or at the apex of the pyramid, so to say.
Let's dive into this a little bit because, and this is particularly relevant for where you are in Germany. I'm here in Asia. And as you know, in Asia, the skills that parents constantly emphasize, math, science, STEM, science, technology, and, engineering, mathematics, STEAM too, but the arts a little bit less than that. In the United States, there is this awful trend that's going on now where they're cutting back on humanities programs at universities across the country. And more people, particularly in the MAGA movement, are saying, your poetry degree isn't going to get you a job. You need to go into hard sciences and math. I want to play a soundbite here from a major thinker in this space, someone who I don't really agree with on most things. Peter Thiel is well known as one of the tech billionaires in Silicon Valley. He was behind the Trump administration. He says a lot of provocative and controversial things, but there was something that he said at a conference last year about the skills in the AI era that will matter that I want to get your reaction to.
My intuition would be it's going to be quite the opposite, where it seems much worse for the math people than the word people. And what people have told me is that they think within 3 to 5 years, the AI models will be able to solve all the U.S. Math Olympiad problems, and that would shift things quite a bit. It's the thing that's the test for everything, right? It's like, if you want to go to medical school, okay, we weed people out through physics and calculus, and I'm not sure that's really correlated with your dexterity as a neurosurgeon. I don't really want someone operating on my brain to be, doing prime number factorizations in their head while they're operating on my brain or something like that. In the late 80s, early 90s, I had a sort of a chess bias because I was a pretty good chess player. And so my chess bias was you should just test everyone on chess ability. And that should be the gating factor. Why even do math? Why not just chess? And that got undermined by the computers in 1997. And isn't that what's going to happen to math? And isn't that a long overdue rebalancing of our society?
So now we're going to have a situation where AI can do pretty much every math problem in the next 3 to 5 years. So the critical thinking skills and those humanities skills, the word people, as Peter Thiel said, may be more important. And that's somewhat counterintuitive from what we've been hearing, and certainly how the educational systems in Germany, India, China, Vietnam, and other places are set up. I'd like to get your take on that.
I definitely do agree with the fact that we will finally have perhaps a recalibration of what really matters as intelligence. And of course, also the question of why maths and these analytical sciences have always been at the apex of evaluation frameworks is quite clear, because it's always easy to control the outputs of a closed system like that. And even when we started implementing these big, hairy goals of, developing an AI that plays better chess, then somebody said, oh, you know what, but it won't be able to play Go. And it did, the game of Go. And now we're talking about that by 2027, latest 2029, the likes of ChatGPT will be able to solve every question in the International Maths Olympiad questionnaire. It's not a surprise, because even with the narrow AI systems that we implemented in the last many, many years, which was, part of the professional journey I was on, you always needed an experienced programmer or an analytical person on the other hand to control, the outputs of it. And now we're looking at systems that will do most of it on their own. So it's not a surprise that the value and the high salaries that were paid to these particular individuals, this will be recalibrated. For the words people, though, I feel the journey would not be as rainbow, rose-eyed, glass-based, because I think they'll have another challenge on their hand. And this is where we really need to look at an interdisciplinary approach. I think for the longest time, we've let technology go on its own, path on the left side of the Autobahn, as we like to call it in Germany, with, guns blazing forward without really consulting or communicating. Of course, big companies do have anthropologists and psychologists who help them out. The words people will have a problem at their hand because we already are dealing with the issue of epistemic access. What that essentially means is, the individual's ability to know or justify something. When I have this small little white box in ChatGPT, which is providing me an access towards education and knowledge, but at the same time limiting what I understand as my worldview, we have to really solve the question of that epistemic opacity. Because really the question would be, if AI is the middleman which decides everything I think about the world, on what foundation are we building that? Are we building that on ideals of fairness, of productivity, of speed, of efficiency? Who decides that? Who gets a say in that? And at the moment, we are not at the table for that discussion.
Yeah. So you work with young people, students. What would you tell a student right now is the skills that they need to take advantage of while being in school, and maybe what to avoid? And then, as I said, spare a thought for the young graduate who's trying to find a job and break into the job market, and yet finding it very, very difficult. Youth unemployment in China, in South Africa, in many countries, and increasingly in Europe and the US is going up radically. So what do you tell young people about what they need to do in order to get into this economy?
A philosophical take on it, and maybe it helps a few, maybe the others find it a bit vague, but I really feel that, I'm somebody who transitioned from the global south to the global north. And all my life, I focused on improving and developing my talents, because talent is about, hitting a target that no one else can hit. But I think now the time has come that the younger generation really needs to focus on their inner genius. And I really mean it, because it's, genius is hitting a target that no one else can see. And at the moment, there is a lot that we cannot see. And for all the youngsters who are trying to get into the workforce, I would try to think about skills of decision making, because besides the whole aspect of critical thinking, I think one of the biggest underlying differentiating factors between good leaders and bad leaders is their ability to make decisions. And we went through this phase of information is power to now insights is power, and now knowledge and, your AI outputs are power. What still remains is that we still can't explain in many, many ways why we as humans make decisions. Logic reasons, but emotion triumphs usually in most decision-making processes. It's a well-known fact that we, have bounded rationality, in which even if we are presented with hundreds of options, we will end up making the most good enough choice, which might not be the best option, but something that's good enough. And I think for any young individual who wants to differentiate themselves from the pack, it sounds almost counterintuitive, because, the youngsters in a workforce always have been put at the bottom of the pyramid, and they are made not to make decisions. Somebody else makes decisions for them. And I think we need to flip that. We need to include decision-making capability and the ability to hone and harness that at universities in early stages of jobs. Try to give young people this potential to explore the results of what they make, and not protect them always from some of the other decisions that can go haywire. And I would say I'm quite bullish on the Gen Z, Gen Alphas.
Okay.
Irrespective of the narrative that is, yes, they are a bit peculiar about the way they do things.
I know, but come on, let's be serious here. Hasn't every single generation said
Exactly.
that the generation coming up are a bunch of lazy, good-for-nothing people? We did that in our day. It's the same thing over and over again. And I see these grumpy old people, and I say that as a proud card-carrying member of the older generation now, saying these dumb kids, and you're just thinking, I think you're right. I think that they're coming up with a completely different set of skills and an outlook that many of us from our generations just don't understand.
And, I think the great thing about that, and kudos to you. And I say the same thing, like, sometimes we forget that we were also quite lazy and useless in the early
Yes, that's right.
stages of our university degree or, school life, of course. And, we give this generation far less credit than what it has managed to achieve. They had to deal with the absurdity of the COVID crisis. They live in a world where there's so much financial vulnerability, inflation is high, you cannot own a house. So what they've done, they've transitioned from this, where the barometer is no longer what you possess to now what you experience. So they're trying to proceed with that. Every single day they are bombarded with, their mental health is bombarded with being, the target audience of the attention economy. It's not an easy task. It might be less violent, but it is a lot of stuff going on in the brain. And they managed, maybe they don't have all the answers, but they're definitely asking the right questions. And I feel that when you are forcibly perhaps detached from, this idea of comfort and routine, which our generations had, you're perhaps, compelled to redefine old norms and ask questions which nobody has asked for the longest time. I'll give you a minor example, small little example. So in Germany, there's this trend. It's called pudding with a fork meetups. So in cities like Stuttgart and Hamburg, Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas and the young ones, what they do is they do these spontaneous meetups and they send around on social media these invitations. All you have to do is you have to arrive at a park or an open space with a pudding and a fork. And you can have, thousands of people are frolicking to these pudding with a fork meetup to share the silly experience of community. Social media stats are down. Dating platforms are seeing a slump. So I think this generation is realizing that they're being played for the longest time. And I think if I really place my bets on somebody to define the new job descriptions of the future, whether it's, empathy architects or intuition engineers, I really think I would place my bets on them to reimagine the work that needs to be done with AI rather than, our generations, we are trying to take these tools, these fantastic tools and try to fit them in these old deterministic problems of yesterday. And then we're getting surprised why things are not working. But I think they will try to look at these new tools in a different way where hallucination will be seen as a feature and not as a bug, and definitely depend and create ecosystems around it.
And a lot of things that when I talk to young people, I tell them that particularly for kids going into the knowledge economy, there's a very good chance that the job that they're going to go into literally has not been invented yet.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think back 5 years from now, again, I was trying to think back when the AI stuff started really coming into the discourse. ChatGPT wasn't a thing. You think back 20 years before, YouTube was barely a thing. Facebook was barely a thing. So here we are, and these things are changing faster and faster. Now, Jasvin, we close every show with the same question for each of our guests. What part of the conversation do you want to change about AI?
I think I was, thinking about it last night, and I was like, it's so apt that this podcast is called Conversation Changers, because what AI has managed to do is change the way we communicate and converse. And it will continue to do that until we, wake up and smell the coffee. I would, as I mentioned, really want a retribution and a reinvokement of relevance for the forgotten sciences, and the fact that we need to bring back the ability to work in interdisciplinary settings where technology, anthropology, literature, creative artists are sitting on a table and thinking about solving the problems of the world. And that is the kind of world I would be love to be a part of. And that's the part of the conversation I would like to change. Come out of our siloed ways of looking at things and expand our worldview a bit larger.
I love it. And I love your optimism for the next generation. I think they deserve that. And again, I don't envy this generation.
Yeah.
It's not an easy time with everything that they have to deal with. So I think giving them the credit that they deserve is really important. Jasvin, thank you so much for your time. And for these are big questions that we all have to start thinking about, and the work that you're doing on your Substack is fantastic. We'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Jasvin Bhasin is a tech philosopher, engineer, and founder of Bridge the Next, a Munich-based think and do tank for digital futures, and our guest today on Conversation Changers. Thank you so much, Jasvin.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll be back again next episode in about 2 weeks with another episode of Conversation Changers. On behalf of everybody from Salzburg Global around the world, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm Eric Olander. Thank you for watching and for listening.
In an age of polarized voices and reinforced views, be part of changing the conversation. Follow us on social media and visit us at salzburgglobal.org.